Welcome everybody to the next episode of It's a Fair Question. As moderator of the General Assembly of the Church, there are times for me to speak, but I think it's even more important that I listen. And so that's what I'm doing in this series. I'm asking questions and then I'm listening. Today I'm speaking with Brian Casey, minister at Springburn in Glasgow, an area of multiple deprivation. There may be some folks out there who think that church is for religiously minded folk to occupy themselves on Sunday mornings. Okay, listen up to this interview. You're going to see what church is really about when it hits the ground, what's going on at the cutting edge, and that church really is much more than Sunday mornings. Brian Casey, and It's a Fair Question. Brian, I am delighted to welcome you to be my guest on It's a Fair Question. Let's get right down to it. Brian, you used to serve as a police officer and now you're a minister. We might say you were a cop and now you're a cleric. Describe that for us. Were you looking for something completely different, or actually are the two roles not that dissimilar?
There are certainly a lot of similarities in that we're called to serve people, and I think there are a few ministers and priests who have been cops, and actually the other way around as well. I worked with a lad who had trained to be a priest when I was a cop. For me, I was finding that increasingly the role we were carrying out was becoming more kind of, I suppose, militarised in some ways. I mean, it's becoming more involved in kind of firearms and that sort of stuff. And also, the one thing that always stuck at the back of my mind was you go and visit people to give them bad news, which is a horrible part of the job, but an obviously very important part of the job. You go into the house, you break the bad news, and then you leave, and you never see that person again very often. And I always remember thinking, you know, I'd rather be involved on the other side of that, to be able to spend time with people and get them through that kind of crisis, you know, that momentary sort of bombshell, and then being with them from then onwards. So that was something I definitely wanted to do. In my ministry in Springburn, I very much took the kind of community policing model, which was get out there, get to know all the main local players, make sure you always wear your uniform so they know who you are. So from that point of view, there were definitely similarities in getting to know the community. And I think as well, it leads to good relations with local police. So you become trusted by most of the people within the parish to be a kind of honest broker for everyone, I suppose.
Thanks for that, Brian. I was interested in what you said, that your job previously entailed you just dealing with bad news, being the deliverer of bad news. And in a sense now you're in the business of good news, which isn't to escape the realities of life, but there's something more. And being able to walk with people through all of that gives you so many more opportunities. I'm just interested how you felt recently, Brian. The police have been to the fore in some of our media reports, not least when Constable David White was stabbed in the incident in central Glasgow just a few weeks ago. And then, of course, down south, there's been so many reports of police being assaulted and being bottles thrown at them as they've just been going about their business. How's that seem to you as someone who was a police officer?
I feel very strongly that the police are being put in the front line of something that's not, you know, a problem that's not they're making necessarily. They're being used, I suppose, to enforce perhaps unfair laws in some cases. But when it came to the stabbing of Constable White, I was absolutely shocked. I know in Police Scotland since 2013, when I think they were formed, there have only been 2 instances where people have been shot, and one was fatal, and that happened to be the one recently in the Park Hotel. And that, to me, highlights the fact that as police officers, we're not in the business of killing people. We're in the business of trying to deal with things, or they're in the business of trying to deal with things, you know, to preserve life, to protect life, first and foremost. I remember vividly when I was on a firearms unit, having to put a gun on at the beginning of a shift, and all these questions going through your mind. Under what circumstances would I pull the trigger? Would I pull the trigger? If my life was in danger, would I pull it? If someone else's life was in danger, would I use it? and all of these things going through your mind. Now, I've always been a Christian, and I suppose part of that was formed by the idea that thou shalt not kill. And so I feel incredible affinity with officers just now who are daily making that decision, but also with officers who are being spat at, who are being assaulted. I mean, I was assaulted myself, which ultimately ended my career. And I know the kind of the kind of process I went through mentally at the time, because I was off work initially for 6 months, and throughout that 6 months I went from the very beginning of thinking, how dare he assault me, to the very end thinking, could I have dealt with that differently? Could I have maybe calmed the situation down rather than maybe provoking the man? The man was obviously angry, and rather than, you know, de-escalating that, maybe I wound him up a wee bit too much, and sort of he went that way. So police officers have 1,000,001 different questions going through their minds every day in every incident. I remember being told early on at training school, never tie your laces in public because someone will come and kick you up the backside. You know, and that was back in the 90s. Now, sadly, it's probably going to be worse than that, if anything, with the rise of organised crime, the rise in the use of firearms and knives, and all that sort of stuff. So it's a very dangerous job to be in. And I mean, the oath I took, although I believe it's being changed, was to police without fear, favour, malice or ill will. And I think all the police officers I know kind of live by that motto, that we're not there to judge, we're there to uphold the law. And, you know, it's a very important role in society, definitely.
Thanks, Brian. Let's go on and talk now about your role in ministry. As we all know, our churches across the land have been closed since the beginning of lockdown. And yet, as you and I know, the church is actually alive and well, and it's been as busy as ever throughout that period. Tell us a wee bit about the parish you serve, and why in particular the food bank, which has been very prominent in your ministry of late, why that's so important and so necessary right now.
Well, it's interesting. I spent my probation with Graham Finch in Cadder. Now, Cadder would be what they tend to call Spam Valley for Springburn. And when I was looking for a parish, one of the ladies said to me, Springburn's vacant. And I thought, Springburn. I said, no, I'm going to St Giles. You know, I'm high church. I'm going to St Giles, kind of laughing and joking about it. And she challenged me and said, what do you mean? I'm from Springburn. And it kind of went from there as a slow burn. There are other incidents in Springburn as well, which actually I can now see God's hand in kind of drawing me towards that area. But Springburn, and I looked into it, was an area that very much still had a kind of sense of community about it. Some places in Glasgow, the kind of schemes where, you know, Drum Chapel and Easter House in particular, where they built the houses without building the social infrastructure back in the 70s, maybe don't have the same sense of community, but Springburn still does have that kind of pride in being from Springburn, not from Glasgow necessarily. So Springburn's in the lowest 10th of the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. You wouldn't necessarily know that speaking to some of the people, but there is definitely, over the past 6 years that I've been there, an indication that people are hungry, people are looking for ways out, and sometimes that takes the form of drugs. We have quite a high number of suicides every summer, ironically. The first summer I was there, I had 7 suicides in 6 weeks, so I realised there was definitely an issue with young men feeling maybe disenfranchised, that there were no jobs and things there for them. But when the COVID crisis hit, we had some very frank discussions with our MP, our MSP, and a few other local players, including my good friend and colleague Father John at St Aloysius, the Roman Catholic priest. And we knew that we had to do something because people were going to suffer. Now, we didn't know about furlough at that point, so we did think that people would be losing all of their salaries potentially. But ironically, even losing 20% of a salary if you work is enough to put you into starvation. So we set out an idea that, you know, let's keep the church open in terms of being a base, you know, for running a food bank. We had the telephone system in place, we had the heating and the lighting and all that kind of stuff. We have a number of security cameras as well, because we realised that food would become a commodity at some point, potentially, if things got much worse. And with the local community council and a few other people as well, we decided just to open this food bank and see where it took us. And so we kind of, I don't think we realised how busy we were going to be. In the first 3 months, we worked out, we obviously have to keep records of who we're feeding. We worked out that we've actually fed 3,300 people, I think, in the last 3 months, which accounts for about 1,085 families, roughly. We found it was expanding organically in the sense that people, it wasn't just food they needed toiletries, for example. We also worked together with some local mums who'd set up a baby food bank, because food banks don't give out baby formula routinely, because there's this idea that the breast's best, which of course undoubtedly it is, but there are some parents who struggle with that type of feed. So they set up a baby food bank and they came in-house as well. We then looked at how do we deal with people who are locked in the house who can't get a prescription. And so we decided to deliver prescriptions as well. We had a lot of debate around whether to actually provide a methadone delivery, and we had to speak with various agencies around that. But I realised that in my primary school there are children who have both parents are methadone users, and if they didn't get their methadone on time, potentially it could be the kid that suffers. So we bit the bullet and decided to go ahead with that. We are also now giving fuel top-ups as well, so gas and electricity, which again the government are helping us with, but people are struggling. My friend Father John has always kind of run a kind of ad hoc kind of food bank, if you like, for people in the parish. And I remember about 4 years ago, we'd offered him whatever he wanted from our harvest Thanksgiving. He got the first pick of it and the rest went to the lodging house mission. And he kept picking up tins of beans and tins of spaghetti hoops and things. And I said, well, don't you want something more substantial? And he said no, because very often people who are these cans can't afford to heat what's inside them, so they need to get into the can and eat it. And that was a sobering moment for me when I realised that actually there are people who are far worse off than we ever first imagined. And this experience of COVID has shown that that's definitely the case.
So much going on, Brian, and so much of it in response to the need that is so apparent, as you describe it in your parish situation. But let me just put this to you. There will be some folks out there who think, for goodness sake, we have a welfare state. I mean, if people can't keep some money to buy food, then that's their own fault. And as for those you're talking about delivering methadone scripts and so on, well, do you know what? They've made their own bed. They have to lie on it. What do you say to those who say, look, folks have to look after themselves? It's not the role of the church to be involved in this kind of thing.
It's interesting. I found myself defending the early reformers in the sense that they were the ones who founded an education system and a kind of healthcare system. But there are people who say that, undoubtedly. But when you're actually in that kind of, when you're walking alongside people in that level of poverty, you realise that, it only takes one missed appointment at the DHSS to be sanctioned, for example, have no money at all. Now that's maybe okay for them. They can go and beg, or they can go and scrimp and save if you really want to go down that route. But they very often have dependents. They have children. They have people who rely on them. And sometimes it's not their fault as well. A lot of people are probably using the system. I don't know. I haven't really looked at it that way. My view is, as a church, it's not our place to ask questions. It's our place to help people, but also in a sense to help them move forward from using charities. So we would always spend time with people. We wouldn't just, give them, we don't give them money, but give them charity and then just send them away. We'll spend time talking to them. And the amount of references I've given to people recently who are looking for work, the amount of interaction I've had with local housing, for example. It's ironic, actually. A few years ago, I dealt with a kid from the primary school, Georgie, who was a young boy who was born in Georgia but lived all of his life here up until the age of 10 when his mum passed away. Georgie helped to nurse her at home with his gran. And there was a moment then that I thought people are going to be really against asylum seekers. There's that kind of red top newspaper agenda that kind of tries to turn us against people sometimes. And I thought, I'm going to really come in for a lot of criticism here. And I remember one Sunday morning, long after it hit the newspapers and the television, this kind of cause celeb for wee Georgie, a woman in Tesco who works in there, I was in at 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning picking up milk and scones and whatever else I was getting that morning for the kids' address. And she says, "Here, I want to word with you." And I thought, oh, here we go. And it actually changed my whole view of my parish. Way back then, she said, "We've got a group of Syrian asylum seekers who have moved into our close." And I thought, right, okay. And she said, basically they've been put in a flat where they've got nothing. I said, "What do you mean nothing?" "Well, they weren't given beds, they weren't given anywhere to sit, they weren't given proper cooking facilities." She said, "Haven't you got the television? That's terrible, isn't it?" And I said, "Well, okay, so what can I do for you?" And she basically had said that the people within that block of flats had provided everything they needed, including towels and clothing. They'd got them a cooker, they got them bedding, they'd really gone the extra mile for them. The only thing they couldn't get was a fridge. And they said, "Can you help us get a fridge for them?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I'm sure that's not a problem. We'll be able to find one," which we did. And she said something to me that kind of showed me just how caring people in the north part of Glasgow were. She said, "We were out in the close the other night, or the landing the other night, talking, and the two young children who must have been at that point 5 and 7, a plane went overhead and they ran into the flat screaming and crying." And she said, "We didn't know what was going on, so we asked the parents, what's happened?" And they said, "Oh, well, when planes pass over in Syria, it's not someone coming back from Benidorm on holiday. It's obviously gas or troops or bombs." And so the kids obviously been so traumatised by that even living in a relatively safe country, they still saw that. So I suppose what I'm saying is I've kind of ploughed on without necessarily gauging public opinion from that point of view. But given the donations we've been given, given the kind of support we've been given by people, I think people are very much on our sides that we need to help folks. But with that caveat that maybe we need to help them see where they move on from where we are. The church still has a very valuable role to play in society. We're still taken quite seriously in Scotland as being agents of social change, if you like.
You've described beautifully the strength of community that you referred to earlier in your parish, and the vital role that the church plays, which perhaps comes as a surprise to those who know nothing about the church and maybe imagine it's just a group of people getting together to sing on a Sunday morning, for example. Yeah. Brian, a couple of times you mentioned in the passing your friendship and your working relationship with your Roman Catholic colleague. I think we all know that there is a sectarian issue in the west coast of Scotland. It's not new, it's been around long enough. How important is it to you that you're challenging that almost by modelling something different, by working with your colleague from the Catholic Church?
I mean, John was probably the first cleric I met when I went to Springburn, so I made it my mission to go and speak to him and have a chat. But originally, I was a choir boy in the Scottish Episcopal Church, in a very high Scottish Episcopal Church in Stirling. And I suppose the smells and bells have always been something that's been part of my life. But John and I went for lunch and had a discussion about how we move forward in the parish. And my predecessor wasn't too keen to get involved, probably because of that sense that there's a kind of a divide. I didn't find the divide there so much myself when I arrived. My members were very keen to work with the Roman Catholic Church, and so we've established a walk of witness on Good Friday. We've organised various kind of functions between both congregations. We've got to know each other pretty well. And a number of members of my congregation are also members of the Orange Order. And I think that they were the ones who were keenest actually to work with the church. I think if you break down the idea that we're different, because we're not, essentially we're all part of the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. We just do things slightly differently on a Sunday and maybe during the week. If you break that down, I think people can see that underneath we're all just people, and we're all people who want to follow Christ and do the best for our fellow human beings. And so I think it's important to say to people, let's put aside the denominational stuff and work together on the incarnational stuff, the fact that we are all serving Christ here. I had a young, I thought they were a couple at first, it turns out they're brother and sister. They turned up, I think, about a year into my ministry in Springburn on Sunday mornings, and they came fairly regularly. You could tell they weren't from here. And we got to speak to them over the piece, and my congregation are good at taking people back for tea and getting to know them. And they turned out they were from Iran, and they came here. They actually went to school here in England. Their parents were quite wealthy, and they were sent to a public school, and then they claimed asylum once they were old enough to go back, and they were sent to Glasgow via Liverpool. And one Sunday they kind of hung behind. You can always tell there's someone wants to speak to you because they sit in the back pew and wait. You come back in from the door shaking hands, and they said, "We'd like to join your church." And I said, "Yes, of course." Now, I know there's a minority of Christians in Iran, and I rather naively said to them, "So when were you baptised?" We're Muslims. And right away there was I took a sharp intake of breath, because I thought we need to have a real conversation here around the fact that you'll never be able to go back. Your family's still there. And I think that was a moment for me when I realised that it doesn't matter what church you're a member of. If you follow Christ, you have to have a crusade every day almost to make sure that you're doing the right thing and promoting kind of kingdom values all the time.
Brian, absolutely fascinating listening to you speaking about your ministry and about the role of the church in your community at this time. Now, thank you for sharing so openly, so widely. But let me ask you this as we bring things to a conclusion. How do you keep going? Sounds to me that alongside all of those activities, combined with the regular run-of-the-mill stuff that a minister's involved in, you must be going 24/7. You must feel exhausted at times, physically and perhaps in here as well. Maybe just say a word in finishing about how you sustain your life and your ministry.
When I left the police, I had the benefit of going to university for a short period of time. Well, for 5 years, in fact. I started off in psychology and ended up with a degree in French. Worked that one out. I'm sure there's a psychological background there. But as part of that, I studied a number of different things within that. And that keeps me going. That kind of independent study keeps me going. Private prayer as well. I tend to always enjoy going into the church when it's quiet and just sitting alone and listening, listening for God's kind of message for me. And ironically, occasionally, Father John and I go out for lunch, usually once a month under normal circumstances. It's been slightly different during COVID, but that helps. And part of what helps is I've now got a ritual that goes on where I'll go up to his chapel on Friday morning for his Mass. And it's nice to actually be ministered to rather than ministering to people. Now, obviously, I don't take communion for various reasons, but it's nice to actually sit there with his people and be fed by him. And I know he's been to some of my services as well, so it's nice to have that prayer from other denominations for you as well. I quite enjoy, maybe enjoy is not the right word, a huge part of my ministry is funerals. Death and dying is a huge part of my ministry. It always has been in Springburn. I think last year I did 157 funerals, which I think is about the second highest in Presbytery at the moment. And people often ask, how do you manage that? But actually, being able to walk alongside people and hear their stories, their anxieties, their fears, yes, but also the good times, the happy times they had with someone, and to be able to put that into words, to weave that into a eulogy and deliver that at a funeral, to be able to do that, such a privilege in ministry. And I think that helps to keep me going as well, just as well, considering it's a huge part of my ministry, but it does tend to keep me going to be able to see I'm doing something not just constructive, but also bringing Christ into people's lives. And the amount of new members I've had through funerals has been quite heartening, actually, that people have come to hear more about this gospel that they've maybe heard for the first time at a funeral. So, yeah, a bit of pioneer ministry and a wee bit of kind of friendship with other clerics, and indeed music and reading, I think, kind of keep me going. And also collapsing once a year in the Outer Hebrides for a week kind of keeps me going as well, I have to say.
Thanks, Brian. Listen, I know we're not really supposed to do pride, are we? But it makes me proud to be part of a church that has a life and a witness such as you've described today in one of the tougher communities in our country. So let me thank you for doing that. First of all, let me thank you for sharing with us today, and let me wish you God's blessing on your continued life and work, Brian. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martin. God bless you and your year as moderator. We couldn't have picked a better man.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks.